The night was quiet in Kasira, the kind of night when everyone was asleep and only the sound of rain filled the air. Nia was lying in bed, believing her marriage to Oba was safe, even though she often felt the cold stares of Mama Ife, her mother-in-law. She thought love would protect her, that her patience and kindness would win their hearts. But she was wrong. At 2 a.m., her world shattered. Oba shook her awake, his voice sharp, his eyes filled with something she had never seen before. Mama Ife stood behind him, her arms crossed, her face full of anger. Without warning, they pulled out her suitcase, already packed with her few clothes, and dragged it toward the door. Nia's heart raced. She begged them to stop, asked what she had done. "You are nothing but a burden," Mama Ife spat. "You brought no wealth, no dowry. You are useless in this house." Oba, the man who once promised to protect her, stood silently, then coldly said, "Leave." The rain poured harder as they shoved her outside. The wind slapped her face, mixing with her tears. She stood barefoot in the dark, clutching the handle of her old suitcase, watching the door slam shut behind her. The home she once built with love had turned into a prison that rejected her. That night, in the middle of the storm, Nia felt the deepest betrayal, not from strangers, but from the two people she trusted most. The street was silent except for the sound of Nia's footsteps splashing in the puddles. The rain had soaked her thin dress, and the cold cut through her bones. She clutched the small bag in her hand like it was the only piece of herself she had left. Her suitcase had been thrown out, but even that felt heavier than her heart. With bare feet pressing against the wet ground, she walked slowly, unsure where to go, unsure if she even wanted to keep walking. Every house she passed was dark. The neighbors who once greeted her with smiles and called her daughter were all asleep, hidden behind closed doors. She wondered if anyone would care if they saw her now, thrown out like trash in the middle of the night. Her chest ached as she remembered how she had once laughed in those same streets with Oba, believing their love was unshakable. Now those memories felt like cruel lies. Her tears mixed with the rain, running down her face as if the sky itself was crying with her. She thought of Mama Ife, the woman she had respected, cared for, and even served meals with her own hands. She used to tell her friends, "I am lucky my husband's mother treats me like her own." How foolish those words sounded now. That same woman had looked her in the eyes and called her useless, unworthy, nothing. With each step, the rejection pressed heavier on her chest. She remembered her own mother, gone too soon, who had taught her to sew and whispered to her that kindness always finds its way back. But tonight kindness felt like a distant dream. The world was cruel, and the people she trusted most had turned against her. The street stretched endlessly before her, dark and empty. Her feet were bruised, her body shivered, but the pain inside her heart was far worse than the cold. She whispered to herself, "Why me? What did I do to deserve this?" The question echoed in her mind, but no answer came. She thought about turning back, knocking on the door, begging Oba to open it, but then she remembered his eyes. Hard, distant, no love in them. He had chosen his pride, his mother's harsh words, over the vows they had shared. That realization broke her more than the rain, more than the darkness. Step by step, Nia kept moving, even though her body begged her to stop. The road felt endless, the night felt merciless, but somewhere deep inside, a small voice told her she could not fall here. She had to keep walking, even if she didn't know where the road would lead. And so, in the lonely silence of Kasira's midnight streets, Nia walked, broken, abandoned and barefoot, carrying only her pain, her tears, and the faint hope that somewhere ahead, light still existed. Nia's legs were trembling as she dragged herself down the lonely road. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but her body was already drenched and heavy with cold. Her feet burned with every step, and she felt as though the night would swallow her whole. Her vision blurred from tears and exhaustion, and for a moment she thought she might collapse right there on the wet ground. Then suddenly, a pair of bright headlights cut through the darkness. The light was so strong that Nia raised her hand to shield her eyes. The sound of a car slowing down reached her ears, and her heart skipped a beat. Fear and hope collided inside her chest. Who would be driving on this empty street at such an hour? The car stopped beside her, and the window rolled down. A warm, familiar voice called out, "Nia?" Is that you? She froze, hardly believing her ears. Through the dim light, she recognized the face behind the wheel. Mr. Cato, her late father's old friend, a man she hadn't seen in years but whose kindness she could never forget. He was older now, with silver strands in his hair, but his eyes were the same, gentle, steady, full of concern. "Nia, what are you doing here at this hour in the rain?" His voice carried both worry and disbelief. She opened her mouth to answer, but only a choked sob came out. Her lips trembled as she tried to explain, but the words were too heavy to form. Seeing her state, Mr. Cato quickly stepped out of the car and rushed to her side. He placed a firm yet gentle hand on her shoulder, steadying her trembling body. "You're freezing," he said softly. Without another word, he opened the car door and guided her inside. The warmth of the car wrapped around her instantly, and for the first time since she had been thrown out, Nia felt a small sense of safety. She held her wet bag tightly in her lap, as if it was the only thing left of her old life. Mr. Cato started the car again but kept stealing glances at her. "Nia, where were you going?" he asked gently. She lowered her head, ashamed, her voice breaking as she whispered, "They threw me out." For a moment, silence filled the car. Mr. Cato's hands tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched, but he didn't ask for details. Instead, he said firmly, "Don't worry, my child. You are not alone tonight." Tears rolled down Nia's cheeks, but this time they were not just tears of pain, they carried a hint of relief. In the darkest hour, when she thought no one cared, someone had appeared. Not just anyone, but a man who had once been a friend to her father, almost like family. As the car moved forward through the wet streets of Kasaira, Nia leaned back against the seat, her body still trembling, but her heart holding onto a fragile spark of hope. The storm outside was still raging, but inside that car, she felt the first light of safety after a night of betrayal. Mr. Cato drove Nia through the quiet streets until they reached his home. The gate opened, and warm light spilled out from the windows. For Nia, it felt like stepping into another world, so different from the darkness she had just been thrown into. His wife, Mama Cato, hurried to the door as soon as she saw them. She gasped when she noticed Nia's soaked clothes and trembling body. Without asking too many questions, she wrapped a shawl around Nia's shoulders and led her inside. The house smelled of ginger tea and fresh bread. It was simple but full of warmth, the kind of place where every corner carried love. Mama Cato sat her near the fire, rubbing her cold hands between her own, whispering, "You are safe now, my child." Those words made Nia's chest tighten, and for the first time that night, she let herself cry freely. Her tears fell, not from fear anymore, but from the relief of finally being cared for. A hot cup of tea was placed in her hands, and the warmth spread through her body. Mama Cato brought her dry clothes, while Mr. Cato carried her small bag to the guest room. No one judged her. No one asked why she was out in the rain so late. They only gave her comfort, as if she had always belonged there. That night, when she lay down on the soft bed, she hugged the blanket close and closed her eyes. For months she had slept with fear, waking to harsh words and silent tears. But in this house, she slept peacefully like a child again. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, birds chirped outside, and for a moment Nia forgot her pain. She walked into the kitchen where Mr. and Mama Cato were already seated. Mr. Cato looked at her with steady eyes, the kind that carried both wisdom and kindness. "Nia," he said firmly but gently, "listen to me. Your worth is not tied to a man's approval. A husband who cannot see your value does not define who you are." His words landed deep inside her heart. She stared at him, her lips trembling, unsure how to respond. He leaned forward, his voice softer now. "You have strength, use it. Do not let this night be your end. Let it be your beginning." Those words planted something in Nia that had been buried under pain. Hope. She thought of her mother's lessons, the needle and thread she once used to stitch clothes with love. She realized she still carried skills, dreams, and a spirit that no rejection could destroy. Mama Cato reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You are not broken, Nia. You are only waiting to rise." In that safe haven, surrounded by kindness she thought she had lost forever, Nia's healing began. She didn't know how her journey would unfold, but she knew one thing: she was no longer alone, and her story was far from over. Days passed in the Kato household, and slowly Nia began to feel her strength returning. The first few mornings she still woke up with tears on her pillow, her heart aching from Oba's betrayal. But she remembered Mr. Kato's words. "Do not let this night be your end. Let it be your beginning." Those words kept replaying in her mind like a gentle push, urging her not to sink into sorrow forever. One afternoon, Mama Kato took Nia along to the local women's center where she volunteered. It was a small place, filled with laughter, chatter, and the hum of sewing machines. Women from different parts of Kasaira gathered there to learn skills, support each other, and build small businesses. When Nia stepped inside, the familiar sound of fabric being cut and stitched touched her heart. She remembered her mother, who had once taught her how to sew with patience and love. Suddenly the memories didn't feel painful, they felt like a gift. Mama Kato encouraged her. "Why don't you try? Your hands remember." Hesitant at first, Nia picked up a needle and thread. Her fingers trembled, but as she began to stitch, the rhythm returned. Piece by piece, her old confidence came back. Soon she was helping other women with their designs. Her quiet creativity began to shine. Word spread quickly about Nia's skill. Her patterns were unique, full of color and life. Women admired her ability to transform simple fabric into something beautiful. Soon the center started receiving requests for her work. Orders came in for dresses, head wraps, and skirts. Nia could hardly believe it. People were paying for the very thing that once connected her to her late mother. For the first time in months, she felt proud of herself. She was not just a woman abandoned in the rain. She was an artist, a creator. Each design she completed stitched a little more dignity back into her soul. She worked long hours, but her heart was lighter now because every garment carried a piece of her healing. The women at the center began looking up to her, asking for tips and guidance. They said, "Nia, your hands have magic in them." She would smile shyly, still not fully believing in herself, but deep inside she felt a fire beginning to burn again. At night, when she lay in bed, she no longer cried herself to sleep. Instead, she thought about new patterns, new colors, and the future she could build. The pain of rejection was still there, but it no longer controlled her. She was turning it into strength, one stitch at a time. In the same town where she had been thrown out in shame, Nia was slowly rising again. Like a bird from ashes, her wings were finding shape. And this time, she promised herself, no storm and no betrayal would ever break her again. Months passed, and the small orders Nia stitched at the women's center grew into something bigger than she had ever imagined. Her designs were not ordinary, they carried her heart in every stitch. The colors were bold, the patterns told stories, and people said her clothes made them feel alive. Soon, Mama Kato encouraged her to take the next step, open her own stall in Kasaira's busy market. The morning she set up her stall, Nia's hands shook as she arranged the dresses, skirts, and head wraps she had worked on for weeks. The market was loud, filled with vendors calling out their goods, children running between stalls, and the smell of roasted maize drifting in the air. Nia wondered if anyone would notice her little space among the noise and chaos. But before long, curious women stopped by. They touched the fabric, admired the colors, and whispered to one another. Her first customer, a young mother, tried on one of Nia's dresses. When she saw herself in the small mirror hanging by the stall, her face lit up with joy. She smiled and said, "This is beautiful. I feel like a queen." Those words filled Nia's heart more than the money she received. One customer led to another, and soon a small line began to form. By evening, half her stock was gone. Day after day, her stall grew busier. People traveled from nearby villages just to buy her clothes. The bright prints became her signature style. Everyone knew if you wanted something unique in Kasaira, you went to Nia's stall. Vendors in the market began to admire her determination, whispering, "That's the woman who was thrown out in the middle of the night, and look at her now." It wasn't long before her story caught the attention of the local newspaper. A journalist visited her stall, asking about her journey. At first, Nia hesitated to share the painful parts, but then she realized her story could inspire others. The headline the next week read, Woman rejected at midnight now dresses the city. People across the region read about the young woman who had been cast out with nothing, only to rise again with skill and courage. When Nia saw her name in print, she held the newspaper close to her chest and whispered, "Mama, I hope you see me now." Her heart swelled with both pride and gratitude. She was no longer the woman wandering barefoot in the rain. She was Nia, the designer, the survivor, the woman who turned pain into beauty. At the market, her stall became more than just a place to buy clothes. It became a symbol. People said her fabrics carried strength, her stitches carried hope. And every time Nia tied a head wrap or adjusted a hem for a customer, she knew this was more than business. It was her first true victory. She had faced betrayal, rejection, and humiliation, but here she was, standing tall in the middle of Kasaira's busiest market, her name spreading far beyond the town. For the first time, Nia felt the taste of triumph, and it was sweeter than she had ever imagined. While Nia's name was rising in Kasaira, life in Oba's house was falling apart piece by piece. After throwing her out, he thought freedom would bring him happiness, that he could start fresh and build a bigger life without her. But nothing went the way he imagined. The business ideas he chased failed one after another. Each plan that seemed golden in the beginning turned into dust in his hands. The money he once had slipped away like water through his fingers. Mama Ife, proud and stubborn as ever, refused to accept their downfall. Instead of helping Oba rise with honesty, she borrowed money in his name, promising lenders that her son's ventures would pay back quickly. But weeks turned into months, and the debts only grew heavier. Soon people came knocking at their door, not with respect but with threats. Oba's shoulders carried shame he could no longer hide. The house that once stood tall as a symbol of pride now echoed with arguments and silence. The walls seemed colder, the rooms emptier. Their neighbors noticed the change. Whispers started spreading in Kasaira. "Have you heard? Oba is drowning in debt. Mama Ife is selling things from the house." The same people who once envied their wealth now shook their heads in pity. And then came the bitterest blow. Rumors of Nia's success reached their ears. At first, Oba refused to believe it. "It's just gossip," he muttered, but the whispers grew louder. People spoke of her fashion stall in the market, of the crowds waiting for her designs, of her name printed in the newspaper. They said, "The woman they threw out at midnight now dresses the city." Those words burned like fire in Oba's chest. Mama Ife's pride, sharper than a knife, could not handle it. "How can she be the one they celebrate while we suffer?" she spat, pacing around the house. She had once called Nia worthless, a burden, yet now the whole town praised her as a woman of strength. Every compliment Nia received was like salt on Mama Ife's wounds. Oba, meanwhile, sat in silence, his head heavy with regret. He remembered Nia's quiet smile, the way she had cared for him, the meals she cooked, the small dreams they once shared. He realized too late that the woman he had abandoned was the very blessing he had been blind to. Their nights grew restless. Instead of peace, they argued about money, about mistakes, about the past they couldn't erase. The respect they once commanded in Kasaira was gone, replaced with pity and gossip. And behind every whisper, behind every shameful glance, there was always Nia's name, shining brighter than theirs. In their downfall, Oba and Mama Ife were forced to taste the bitterness of their own actions. They had thrown away the woman who could have lifted them, and now she stood higher than they could ever reach. The tables had truly turned, and their pride was slowly being crushed under the weight of her success. The sun was blazing high over Kasaira, the kind of afternoon when the streets buzzed with life. Nia stepped out of her new office, her heart light after a busy day of meeting clients and planning new designs for her growing business. She carried herself with quiet pride, dressed in one of her own creations, her head held high. But as she reached the gate, her steps stopped cold. Standing there, as if the past had come to life again, were Oba and Mama Ife. Their faces were not proud or stern like before. Instead, they looked worn, defeated, and desperate. Oba's once sharp clothes were faded, and his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had pressed them down. Mama Ife, who once walked with authority, now stood with restless eyes, her scarf slipping from her head as she shifted nervously. For a moment, Nia could hardly breathe. Memories rushed back. The stormy night, the suitcase in her hand, the door slamming in her face. But here they were, waiting at her gate, not with power but with pleading eyes. "Nia," Oba began, his voice low and shaky. "We came to talk, to ask for your help. We are still family." Mama Ife quickly added, "Yes, child. No matter what happened, blood is blood. We should unite again." Their words were wrapped in false sweetness, but the desperation behind them was clear. They weren't asking for unity. They were begging for rescue. The debts, the shame, the failures had finally pushed them to the point where the woman they once threw away was their only hope. Around them, people in the street had begun to slow down, watching the scene unfold. Some whispered, some smirked, and a few openly laughed. Everyone in Kasaira knew the truth. These were the same people who had dragged Nia out at 2 a.m., calling her a burden. And now they stood in broad daylight, begging at her gate. The crowd's whispers grew louder. "Look at them now. Didn't they call her useless? Now the useless one is their savior." The laughter stung Oba and Mama Ife, but they tried to hold their heads up, pretending they still had dignity left. Nia stood silently, her heart beating fast. Part of her still felt the old wound, the sting of betrayal. But another part of her had grown stronger, wiser. She looked at them not with anger but with calm eyes. For once, the power was in her hands, and the whole town knew it. Mama Ife stretched her hands out as if to embrace her, but Nia did not move. The crowd chuckled louder, shaking their heads. The scene was no longer private. It was a lesson playing out for everyone to see. That hot afternoon in Kasaira, the past and present collided at Nia's gate. And though her betrayers came with desperate voices, the world around them had already declared the truth. The tables had turned, and justice was unfolding in plain sight. The street was silent for a moment, all eyes fixed on Nia. Oba and Mama Ife stood at her gate, their voices trembling, their hands stretched toward her as if reaching for the very thing they had once thrown away. The crowd around them waited, eager to hear what Nia would say. But Nia did not rush. She stood tall, her shoulders straight, her face calm. She looked at the two people who had once been her whole world, the ones who had pushed her out into the storm at 2 a.m. She saw the fear in their eyes now, the desperation, the shame. Once, their words had crushed her. Once, their rejection had broken her. But not anymore. Her voice was steady, every word carrying the strength of her journey. "That night at 2 a.m., she began, her eyes fixed on them. "You taught me I had no home. You made me believe I was worthless. You closed your doors and your hearts, and you left me in the rain." Her words sliced through the silence, making Oba flinch and Mama Ife lower her eyes. Nia's hand rested on the bag she carried, the same way she had once clutched her small bundle on the night she was thrown out. But now that bag was full of orders, designs, contracts, the proof of the empire she had built from nothing. She lifted her chin and continued, her tone calm but powerful. "Today I carry my own home in my hands. And in this home I have built, there is no room for cruelty, no space for betrayal, no seat for people who once called me a burden." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, some whispered, but most just stared in awe. For many, it was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment Nia's dignity spoke louder than all the pain of the past. Mama Ife tried to speak, her voice cracking. "But Nia, we are family." Nia raised her hand gently, cutting her off. "Family does not throw you into the night. Family does not call you useless. Family does not destroy you and then come back only when they need saving." Her words carried no anger, only truth. That truth was heavier than any insult. Oba's eyes filled with tears. He reached out as if to touch her, but Nia stepped back. "You both chose to leave me with nothing, chose to rise. And now, I will not go back to the place where love was only cruelty in disguise." She turned her back to them, her steps calm, her head held high. Oba and Mama Ife sank to the ground, their tears mixing with the dust beneath them. The crowd began to murmur, their voices growing louder until one word echoed above the rest: "Justice." In that moment, Nia did not just walk away from her past, she walked into her future. A future built not on bitterness, but on dignity, courage, and the unshakable strength of a woman who refused to be broken. Years passed, and Nia's name became known far beyond the markets of Kasaira. What started as a small stall grew into a respected fashion brand, and with every success, she remembered the girl who once walked barefoot in the rain with nothing but tears and a broken heart. Instead of keeping her victory only for herself, Nia decided to give back. She opened an academy for young girls, a place where they could learn tailoring, business, and most importantly, self-worth. The classrooms buzzed with laughter and the sound of sewing machines. Girls who once thought they had no future sat proudly at their tables, stitching dreams into fabric. Nia walked among them, guiding their hands, telling them stories of her journey. One afternoon, she stood before them and shared words she had carried for years. "The night I was thrown out, I thought my life had ended," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "But that night was not the end. It was the beginning of my true story. Pain pushed me out, but strength carried me forward. And today I want you all to know, you carry that same strength inside you." The girls listened with wide eyes, some holding back tears, others smiling with new hope. For them, Nia was not just a teacher, she was living proof that brokenness could turn into beauty. In Kasaira, her name became more than just a brand. It became a story mothers told their daughters, a reminder that no storm lasts forever, and no betrayal can bury a determined heart. Nia was no longer just the woman who survived a cruel night, she was the symbol of resilience, courage, and the power to rise again.